Hello, my fellow Marks. It's me, Martin, and I didn't really have time to write a Mark remark this week. See, I started working on a really big episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, my other show that I do, and it took up so much of my time that I really only had the weekend to make an attempt at recapping Raw and Smackdown. I wanted to do that. I really wanted to try and make a Mark remark for Raw and Smackdown since we're leading into the Royal Rumble, and that's my favorite pay-per-view, and people always seem to enjoy my Rumble recaps more than any other video I do, so I didn't want to shortchange you guys and sit on my ass and fart out a few jokes. I knew that if I spent 3 days working on Mark remark as opposed to the usual amount of time, I'd be half-arsing it. And the last thing I want to do is give you a half-arsed comedy video. So instead of that, I'm going to give you guys a full-arsed opinion piece that I'm calling Mark My Words. It's something I thought about doing for a while because a lot of you are genuinely interested in how I feel about pro wrestling, and I don't know why, because my opinion is about as meaningless as anyone else's. But I can understand why it might be fun to just sort of shoot the shit about the things I love in pro wrestling and the things I don't always love in pro wrestling. Because I don't want to say hate, you know, I don't really hate anything all that much in pro wrestling, and the stuff I do hate, I'd rather just not give the oxygen of attention. And please, feel free to skip this video if you just came for the laughs. I'm sure it won't be a particularly funny video, and I'm not going to hold it against you if you spam the comments asking why I'm not doing a silly voice or making Seth Rollins jokes. You hoped you'd be watching one thing, and I'm going to give you something else instead. It's like watching most WrestleMania main events. So feel free to boo through this whole thing or walk out, but for those of you who do want to give this a chance, here are my thoughts on the whole Raw versus Smackdown debate. Not everyone agrees with this, but in my opinion, since the brand split, SmackDown Live has overall been twice as entertaining as Raw. And the people that do agree with me tend to say, well, it's because this guy is producing it, or it's because Vince McMahon isn't producing it, or it's because Roman Reigns isn't on it, or who knows. A lot of people think it's simple to explain, but it's really not. In fact, from my perspective, a lot of the reasons people give are kind of bollocks. For wrestling arguments in general, not just this debate. A lot of people like to refer to internet rumors or wrestling dirt sheets when they present one definitive explanation as to why a show is bad, or a match is bad, or a wrestler is bad. And let's get one thing straight right now, I don't really put much faith in those sources. I'm not saying they're always wrong, but they're definitely not always right. If you read something on the internet and you present it as gospel with no real evidence, I tend to discount that. I remember a few months before the movie The Dark Knight came out, I was in a Blockbuster video, and this guy was arguing with the desk clerk saying, well, I was looking forward to the movie, but then it turns out, according to this one website, they had to rewrite the ending so that the Joker died, and now it's just going to be awful. Well, 10 years later, that guy sounds like an idiot. But at the time, there was no real evidence to contradict what he was saying, so he got to pretend that he was the expert in the room. And if you ask me, a lot of the time, that's all internet rumors are, a convenient pretense for sounding like an expert because nobody can really discredit you definitively. So when I hear people say, well, SmackDown is better because Vince McMahon isn't involved, it's like, who even knows? If there is evidence to prove that, I haven't seen it. In fact, I've seen multiple reports saying that he is involved, just as much as he is on Raw. But people certainly enjoy accrediting all of WWE's worst decisions to him by default, so sure, why not? But regardless, even if Vince wasn't involved, all that does is explain why the two are different, not why one is better than the other. So ignoring all of the internet rumors, ignoring any reports from seasoned experts, again, not that I don't think there's any merit to what they say, I just think that they're wrong too frequently for me to use their information as a basis for discussion. Why is SmackDown Live, in my opinion, consistently a better product than Raw? You ever wonder why we're supposed to cheer for Roman Reigns? I'm not saying that because he sucks. Frankly, he doesn't. This is where you're going to discover that my jokes on Mark Remark definitely do not reflect on my actual feelings. Roman Reigns is an invaluable talent that is being mishandled. I think that much is obvious. He's a consummate professional, he's improved significantly on the microphone, he can put on a great match, and he has the definitive badass look. But I have absolutely no reason to cheer for him. The same could be said for a lot of the good guy characters on Raw, and I think this is an issue that folks tend to overlook because people rightly believe that it's more on the heel to be a really good bad guy than it is for the good guy to be a really good guy. Triple H once wisely pointed out in an interview that Luke Skywalker was only a great hero because Darth Vader was a great bad guy. Based on the information the movies present to us, Luke Skywalker's motivations as a hero are pretty vanilla, and there's nothing about him that makes him all that unique, but his desire to free the galaxy from the tyranny of the evil empire is something you can't help but get behind. Because for God's sake, they blew up Alderaan, and they were peaceful as shit. And that's the real problem at work here. It's not that Roman sucks, it's that the heel-face dynamic on Raw is totally askew and frequently at odds with itself. The good guys aren't good enough, and the bad guys aren't bad enough to make me care about what any of them are fighting over. Example, so Enzo and Cass are feuding with Rusev and Jinder Mahal, and I like everybody involved in this feud. I don't have an aversion to any of them, but I don't give a shit about the feud because the good guys are acting like pricks and the bad guys are acting like buffoons. And don't get me wrong, it's okay to have a good guy be an asshole. People like The Rock and Steve Austin made careers out of being asshole face characters. And it's okay for heels to be treated like a joke sometimes. But look at what's going on here. Enzo tries to sleep with Lana, who's married to Rusev, but it turns out to be a ploy to beat the shit out of Enzo for flashing Lana. Sure, Enzo is a victim here, but he's not being a particularly good guy in this situation, and Rusev and Lana aren't being effective heels because they literally used Enzo's own idiocy and his scumbag attitude against him. They successfully tricked him into fucking himself over. Why would I cheer the guy who tried to make it with a married woman because he got the shit kicked out of him for doing so? Unless I believed that he was in the right, and why would I believe that? Then in the following weeks, Enzo has to attend sensitivity training and spends the whole session insulting Jinder Mahal, who has done nothing to provoke this. And then Jinder joins Rusev in beating Enzo up. So yeah, violence might be a bit of an overreaction, but in the context of a wrestling product, Enzo was kind of asking for it. Again, not a particularly strong face character. So how does Big Cass, Enzo's friend, respond to this? By beating the piss out of Rusev until he gets himself disqualified. And sure, you can argue that Big Cass is being a good friend by sticking up for Enzo, but he's not being a good face character, nor is he being particularly smart. Yes, good job, you gave Rusev a victory and also decided that one bad turn deserves another. Not to mention how all of this makes Rusev look, as he has been consistently avoiding a confrontation with Big Cass for multiple weeks, and just got beat the fuck down by one half of a goofy tag team that has more catchphrases than wrestling moves. At what point in any of this do we, the viewers, become invested? It's impossible to care about Rusev because they've made it clear at this point that he can't win without resorting to trickery or teaming up with Jinder Mahal. But it's equally, if not more, impossible to care about Enzo or Cass because Enzo is falling into traps that he's essentially laying for himself, and Big Cass seems to think the best way to deal with a bully is to bully him back twice as much. Compare this to SmackDown Live's feud with, let's say, Baron Corbin and Kalisto. Whether you like either of these guys or not, I go back and forth on Baron Corbin a lot, I honestly feel they had a pretty solid storyline going on. Corbin played the arrogant newcomer with a chip on his shoulder, and Kalisto represented all the puny little guys that Corbin took task with. It was obviously a feud designed to put Baron Corbin over, so whether you appreciate the end result ultimately comes down to whether you like the guy or not, and I understand a lot of people don't. But you can't question the strength of the storytelling. Corbin gets put into the 5-man Survivor Series team, but he considers it beneath him, so he tells Daniel Bryan and Shane McMahon to shove it. As a result, he gets stuck in a match with Kalisto, where he pays for his arrogance and suffers a loss. Then he continually takes it to Kalisto out of spite, and ultimately destroys him in a strong performance in their chairs match at the TLC pay-per-view. It's a simple story, but both the heel and the face played their roles effectively to the point that, despite not necessarily caring about either of these guys' characters, their roles in the story are easy to understand. Corbin is the douchebag bully who thinks he deserves better. Kalisto is the hero who's here to put Baron Corbin in his place. As a viewer, I understand who I'm supposed to be rooting for and against and why. Look at Raw this week. Titus O'Neil interrupts the New Day to pitch himself as their newest member, and hilariously, the crowd cheers him for it. Why? Because we've been given literally no reason to boo him for it. But because he's a bad guy, the WWE just sort of expects us to dislike him by default, no matter how endearing or otherwise his behavior is. So after coming out and acting like a fool for 2 minutes, once again with the support of the crowd, the New Day responds to this by publicly humiliating him. They literally tell him that people would rather see him on a milk carton than on a box of Bootios. And sure, that's a relatively competent insult, but why is it being said? Why are the New Day being dicks to Titus O'Neil? Oh right, because he's a bad guy. But why is he a bad guy? Oh right, because he's interrupting the New Day, who are the good guys. But why are they the good guys? You can see how this cyclical argument perfectly represents the issue with Raw's face and heel dynamic. We have been given no actual reason to support the good guys and no reason to boo the bad guys. Sure, following this scenario, Titus attacks the New Day, but they fucking goaded him for a good 5 minutes, so what is he supposed to do? Walk away? In the world of wrestling, that may as well be a death sentence for his character. So in the big payoff to this segment where Titus O'Neil arbitrarily wrestles Xavier Woods, the crowd is dead silent except for the part where they chant for Hulk Hogan, which makes sense, I guess, since for the most part, we actually knew if we were supposed to cheer for Hogan at any given time. Don't get me wrong, I think Raw has a bunch of very strong heels and some very strong face characters, but they're not being used effectively for the most part. Whereas when you look at SmackDown Live, you can see it very clearly with characters like The Miz, Alexa Bliss, Baron Corbin, all heels that might have drowned in the mid-card or been treated like a joke on Raw, being utilized to the best of their abilities. Raw seems petrified of the idea of having a strong enough bad guy to counteract just how weak and watered down nearly all of their good guys are. And when nobody cares enough to boo the bad guy, they're sure as shit not gonna cheer the good guy. Speaking of people you don't know whether you're supposed to cheer or boo, the GMs are a huge reason why Raw and SmackDown feel like different shows. Let's start with SmackDown this time. Daniel Bryan has been an intrinsic part of what has made SmackDown Live feel like a unique product, and he's done it, for the most part, without even appearing on the show. A lot of his contributions are reserved for Talking Smack, which is possibly the best piece of media the WWE Network has put out since its inception. Barely beating out Camp WWE for the #1 spot there. I lied, there's going to be some jokes in this video. But when he does appear on the show, he is effective and concise and doesn't outstay his welcome. This past week is a great example. He came out to introduce the contract signing between AJ Styles and John Cena, which is guaranteed to be one of their biggest matches ever, so of course it warrants his attention. But after he had introduced the two participants and promoted the match, he walked the fuck out of the ring and left without any fanfare. I'm not saying that's all he should ever do, and I'm not saying that he should never get involved with storylines. His role as a constant thorn in The Miz's side has been entertaining and has helped develop The Miz as one of the company's strongest heels. But by default, this is how he should be represented. The motivator behind the company's decisions, there to explain things that need to be explained, but never taking center stage or distracting from the wrestlers themselves. That's what he should be doing as a standard. That way, if he does get personally involved or invested in any of the shenanigans, it seems out of the ordinary and, dare I say it, interesting. Meanwhile, on Raw, you have General Manager Mick Foley, who tends to wander into the ring every other segment to make an impassioned announcement about a history-making moment that is sure to go down in history. I joked about it at length on the Mark Remark, but his recent intrusions into Sami Zayn's feud with Braun Strowman were just painful. For those of you who don't remember, Sami Zayn, one of Raw's strong face characters, was pissed at Braun Strowman, one of Raw's strongest heels, for running roughshod over the company in general and acting like everyone else were essentially insects compared to him. Has a lot of the themes of the Baron Corbin versus Kalisto feud that I mentioned earlier. Except for this storyline, instead of just letting Zayn get over by himself, Foley had to interject literally every time Sami so much as breathed in Strowman's direction to make sure it was clear that Sami was in over his head and that Foley didn't think he stood a chance. Did we really need Mick Foley to convey that message? I think Strowman's actions, coupled with the announce team's insistence that Sami was fighting an impossible battle, were literally all we needed, and Foley's role here was not only redundant, but confusing and off-putting. Specifically, right before Sami's match against Strowman at Roadblock, Foley says he's going to trade Sami to SmackDown Live in exchange for Eva Marie, just so that it'll get Sami fired up enough to take on Strowman. So yes, let me point out that Sami's drive to defeat Strowman could not have come from Sami's own ambition or integrity. It couldn't have come from anything Strowman personally did to Sami. It had to come from Mick Foley pranking Sami. And this was widely heralded as a good move by a lot of wrestling fans on forums and videos and the like. And I'm baffled by that reaction. I was at the time and I still am. Because really all it did in the context of the show was go, lol, we swerved the audience and Sami Zayn's anger is just a convenient byproduct of that. But even if this was a halfway decent plot point, it was thrown out altogether when at the pay-per-view itself, Foley waltzed out with a towel and tried to concede the match about 5 minutes in. Which means Foley never believed in him and his prank was just Foley being an asshole. So what does Foley bring to the table as GM? Well, he's Mick Foley for one, and that is something that will always resonate with wrestling fans. People love to see the guy. I myself would rate him as one of my top 3 favorite wrestlers of all time. And if he still had the mind and the capacity for storytelling that he used to, and if they limited his role to one segment at most every episode, you might have something special here. And I don't think his being GM is tarnishing his legacy whatsoever, and it could never damage my opinion of the man as a human being. But by interfering in feuds, by coming out and infamously forgetting what state he's in, or as recently as this week, threatening to ban Chris Jericho from ringside in his own bloody match, he is tarnishing and doing damage to a product that simply doesn't need or benefit from him. In short, Mick Foley should take inspiration from one of his favorite legends, Santa Claus, and appear once a show just to make the kids happy, and then give everyone else the gift of uninterrupted wrestling content. This is the big one, and obviously the last 2 points are kinda tied directly into this. Stories matter. Perhaps more than anything else in wrestling. A good story can save a terrible match. A good story can save a terrible wrestler. A good story can save a terrible promo. But a great match, wrestler, or promo can rarely save poor storytelling. That's why, while Raw has been treading water and floundering, Smackdown Live has been swimming ahead fairly confidently. Despite the fact that when the roster split happened, everyone was calling bullshit on how stacked Raw's roster was in comparison to SmackDown's, Smackdown managed to elevate everyone they brought over by simply telling good stories with them, for the most part. The less said about Randy Orton's magical glowing eyes, the better. A good story is one that has a beginning, middle, and an end, and naturally progresses into the next storyline, and so on until the next cycle. SmackDown has not only demonstrated that it is adept at doing this, but that it can sometimes juggle multiple storylines at once without distraction or anyone losing momentum. Look at how masterfully they've moved Dean Ambrose from the main event feud with AJ Styles to winning the Intercontinental title from The Miz without hurting anyone involved. Look at how effortlessly they turned Baron Corbin into a potential main eventer. Look how even now they've got several dynamic feuds happening in the women's division, whereas Raw struggles to generate interest in more than one. Like I said, a good storyline has a beginning, middle, and end. It goes from A to B and finally to C. SmackDown gets this. Raw, on the other hand, doesn't. Raw is all about moments and doesn't seem to care if a viewer tuned in last week or if they'll tune in next week, so long as they're watching right this very second. Take Sasha versus Charlotte. I like both wrestlers, but you'd have to be kind of daft to think that their feud didn't drag just a little bit. Their story went from A to B to A to B to A to B, and then randomly one day C happened because arbitrarily their feud had to stop. No natural transition between storylines, just Sasha walks out the next week and Nia Jax attacks her. Before this, Nia Jax hadn't even been featured on Raw for several weeks. It feels like there's no preparation or goal in mind here. It's just things happening for the sake of having things happen. Then you have my absolute least favorite storytelling method, skipping A and B and just jumping right to C. Goldberg versus Lesnar is a great example of this. Now, I'd never take anything away from the moment that is Goldberg beating Lesnar in just over a minute, but that's all it was. A moment. There really wasn't much story to speak of. And yeah, you can argue that the story is still happening, but I guarantee that they'll probably just have another historic moment at the Rumble, followed by an even more historic moment at WrestleMania. Admittedly, if you're gonna tell that story, Lesnar and Goldberg are the ones to do it with. They're part-timers and they aren't around enough to tell any kind of real story. But when you look at that next to all the other floundering half stories that are being told with everyone else on the Raw roster, it becomes a much bigger problem than it would be if it just existed by itself amidst a series of feuds that everyone is invested in. A moment doesn't last unless you surround it with other moments that build and reinforce its importance. A moment by itself is just a moment. A story is something worth telling and retelling long after it has transpired. Look no further than the current Raw and SmackDown main event storylines. On SmackDown, you have a returning John Cena challenging AJ Styles for the WWE title. Given their history, the match is already exciting enough. But coupled with the fact that Cena has never beaten AJ, either man has an equal shot at winning this. I want to say that it's obvious that Cena's going to win, but for the first time in a fucking millennia, it's not that easy to call the result of this Cena match. And it's also bound to be a memorable match. I'm not going to go ahead and say it'll be one of the best matches ever, but given their track record, it certainly stands a chance at stealing the show. On the flip side, there's Raw's main event storyline. Roman Reigns versus Kevin Owens for the Universal title. I don't even need to explain who these people are or why they're fighting each other to demonstrate why the storytelling is bad. All I need to tell you is that Kevin Owens and Roman Reigns have wrestled one-on-one several times in the last 2 months, and Owens hasn't really won once. Unless you count their Roadblock match where Owens won by disqualification due to his friend's baffling plan to fool everyone into thinking he was going to attack Kevin for the reason that wasn't the actual reason why he attacked him. But then most people didn't even count Roadblock as an actual pay-per-view, so why would you count that win? Have you ever watched a movie trailer for a movie that showed you literally the whole plot? That's what we're experiencing with this Owens versus Reigns match. We've seen it already. The climax of this entire storyline is identical to its beginning, so what the hell are we supposed to be excited about? Why am I supposed to root for Roman Reigns? Why am I supposed to root against Kevin Owens? Why am I supposed to get hyped for something you've shown me multiple times in the last few weeks? And every single time, it ended up being kind of underwhelming. It's not Kevin Owens' fault, and it's certainly not Roman Reigns' fault. It's the story they've been stuck in. I've complained about both of them having match after match together, and there were people on social media who struck back saying SmackDown is just as bad because James Ellsworth wrestled AJ Styles 3 times in the space of 2 months. Well, they would have a point if AJ Styles versus James Ellsworth had been leading to an AJ Styles versus James Ellsworth match at a pay-per-view. But they weren't. They were building to other things, and James Ellsworth was a storytelling device that they used to get there. If James Ellsworth were on Raw these days, he'd presumably come out and get insulted by all the good guys because of how ugly he is, and then he'd punch them for insulting him, and then we'd all boo him and want him to be beat up, because apparently that's how a story works. The bottom line is that whether you prefer one or the other, Raw and SmackDown feel like totally different shows because whoever the brains are behind them have totally different approaches to stories and characters. One seems more tailored to people who want something to hashtag about after the fact, and the other seems tailored to people who actually want to tune in next week and see what happens. Whatever the cause and whoever's to blame, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the difference is striking and puzzling. And for my money, I sincerely hope that Raw begins to adopt a lot more of SmackDown's positive traits. Ultimately, I want to enjoy both shows, but at times it feels more like watching Raw is work. Even on weeks like this when I'm not working on a video about it. Hope this was even remotely interesting for you guys. Once again, I apologize for the lack of jokes or memes or whatever. I just wanted to give you something that I was invested in. And I hope that you too felt that same investment. Here's to a new year full of potentially great new wrestling experiences. I'll catch you later, and toodle pip.